Welcome to Ad Hoc, now with 13% less ad hoc. I'm joined today by writer, director, and podcaster Pitr Strait to have a conversation about copyright law that will be interesting to about 4 of you, but we're here to do it, so I guess go watch a Final Fantasy VII replay if you don't want to watch it. Pitr, welcome to Ad Hoc. Thank you for agreeing to join this very small channel and hopefully not get me doxxed this time.
Hello, I'm thrilled to be here. I will do my best to not dox anyone, us included.
So as I said, we're here to talk about copyright. Pitr, you work in New York, you do theater, you do a podcast. So kind of what do you know or think you know about copyright, or what have you always wanted to ask about copyright?
Well, so copyright comes up differently in different parts of my work. Probably where it's come up the most sort of contentiously is I have a small theater company called Torn Out Theater, which is most known for, we do work that focuses on gender, sexuality, and body politics. And what we're the most known for is a series of outdoor productions that happen in New York parks of classic plays, usually Shakespeare, but not always, that are performed with full nudity as a central part of the design concept. So, you know, the first production we ever did was an all-female version of The Tempest, in which, you know, about half the cast was fully naked for the entire play, the other half in various states of clothing to nudity, and it's in Central Park.
Okay.
So a bunch of naked women in Central Park doing Shakespeare got a lot of attention. And, you know, it was great because, you know, the show, I really believed in the missions of the show of body positivity and body autonomy and, you know, trying to sort of decommodify the naked female body. You know, it was a great project. And I was really glad that it got a lot of attention. But I'm also not naive, right? I'm aware of the fact that some of that attention was for, shall we say, the wrong reasons.
Right.
Although, I don't know. This isn't an arts podcast, so I won't get into that. I actually, well, I say the wrong reasons, but I'm actually fascinated by the perverts. And I kind of, like, I want them to behave themselves, but I also want the perverts to come see these shows. Because I think they might actually have their minds altered slightly in positive ways.
And that's tied up into it. You can't do a show about the commodification of women's bodies without having the first reaction is to commodify.
Absolutely, yeah. But that does definitely put us, you know, everyone in the company, especially the performers, in kind of a tricky position, because what we're doing is kind of directly confront, you know, it's the same thing with people of all genders. You know, we did a show the following year. Our second show was an all-male Hamlet.
Okay.
And, you know, naked male bodies in public gets a very different kind of reaction, or certainly a different mix of reactions. But in all cases, we're engaging very directly with very sensitive and touchy subjects that often bring out bad actors and bad behavior, no pun intended. Where all this is going in terms of the law, because I promise it is going somewhere, is we have tried in all of our productions to control filming and photography as much as possible. Obviously, that's something that pretty much all theatrical productions try and control.
Right.
But given that our performers are naked and making themselves incredibly vulnerable, you know, a lot of our actors are gung-ho to do it, but they're not, they're also very transparent about the fact that, like, they probably wouldn't do this if it was a national television show.
Right.
Or even like a web series, like anything that's it's not gonna live on in perpetuity. We take our photos, the press takes, well, I guess we'll see, now we're really getting into it, is the thing that has come up so many times is how able are we to control the image and video rights of our actors and of our production?
So that's interesting because it's kind of at the intersection of a couple of things, of a couple of different areas of law, two of which normally come up in the course of theater productions, especially in New York and California, and one of which is not as common. So the two that frequently come up are the copyright to your production and the right of publicity of the actors, because there are 2 states in the country that have explicit right of publicity laws on the books. And they are exactly the 2 states you'd think would have it. It's California and New York.
Sure.
The third one that gets into it then is the right of the bystander generally to take photographs and film in public spaces. And I think as crappy a lawyer an answer as it is, it might be something that you're dealing with kind of in an unknown area of American law.
It does really feel that way. I mean, we have a lawyer on our board who, you know, we've known for a very long time, and we've talked about it with him. We've talked about it with, you know, I've done my best to sort of, I mean, yeah, we talked about this before we recorded, but I'll be very transparent about the fact that, like, I'm the worst kind of smart person in that, like, I know a little bit about a ton of stuff, and sometimes I'm fairly good if I need to at what's the, are we swearing on this podcast or no?
Yeah, we can swear, that's fine.
Great. I'm good at bullshitting my way through something and sounding pretty confident. But the truth is, like, if I actually have to research something like the law, I just, my brain can't take it in. And it's not just the law. Like, I was trying to research TwitchBot chat commands the other day, and someone sent me like this very helpful website, and I just like, oh no, I can't. There's too much. All of which to say that I've tried my best to, like, figure out this answer, and I just think it doesn't seem like there is a clear, this is the deal situation.
So it's, and it might be one where it comes down to what kind of use are they putting it toward, because broadly, if you're in Central Park, you have the right to photograph almost anything that happens in Central Park, because when you go out into the real world, whatever that is anymore, you are giving essentially an implicit license to anyone to take a picture of you. And especially when you are in a crowd, there are cases upholding basically that when you go into the world, you are admitting that there are things that are going to happen in the world that you don't want to have happen. And that's the cost of going out into the world. And California limits it some, and New York might limit it some, especially in terms of commercial productions, like using you in a commercial. But broadly speaking, and kind of going back to perverts, is if somebody wants to take a picture of you for prurient interests, there's not a lot you can do to stop it unless they are actually assaulting you or breaking into a space.
Yeah.
But at the same time, then you as the theater company do have a copyright in that work, even though obviously Shakespeare's in the public domain. You have a copyright in that specific performance. So I think it might come down weirdly to, is someone photographing it for nefarious personal use, or are they sneaking a camera into Naked Hamilton and trying to sell it or post it on YouTube?
Right.
And then that's kind of a different analysis, basically.
Yeah. The idea, so this is how I learned essentially about what in a production can and can't be copyrighted. Because the first time it came up, someone's like, well, isn't it copyrighted? Like, don't you own the rights to the production? I was like, I don't know. And that's how I discovered that I do have a copyright to the staging and, the specific, work for hire designs and all of that. But yeah, I obviously don't have the copyright to the text. But I also don't have a copyright. This is how I learned that you can't copyright a concept.
Right.
Naked Shakespeare, because we did actually have, I don't know if this production ever happened, but maybe 6 months after our first show, we saw a casting call go up for someone else's like crazy new idea of doing Naked Shakespeare outside with a single gender cast. And we're like, oh, okay. And similarly, and I suppose this is a different branch of the conversation we can go down or not, but you know, the podcast that I'm on, the Film Reroll, which
Right.
if people aren't familiar with, the gist is that we take famous movies and we play them as tabletop role-playing games. So whereas movies have scripts that tell them where they go and, you know, what the twists and turns are, we have idiots and dice. And so between the intersection of idiots and dice, things change. I'm not as good at this spiel as our host Paolo is, but that's the basic idea.
I debated just doing a version of his introduction for the introduction to the channel, but I chickened.
Yeah, I mean, it's so iconic at this point. So, you know, he started this podcast about 4.5 years ago, a little less than 4.5 years ago. And at the time, you know, Paolo and I've known him for a million years, and he had been, we had talked about doing a podcast for a long time, but never landed on anything that like felt right. And he had this idea for the Film Reroll. And it's honestly one of the best ideas anyone I've ever known has had. It's clean, it's elegant, and it's new. Like, I felt confident saying that now. Saying that then, I feel very confident saying it now. Because if someone had done it before us, it would have come up by now.
Right.
At least if they'd done it. Yeah. But I'll tell you this for sure: people have done it after us.
Yeah, doesn't surprise me.
A few times, and it's a little bit different each time it pops up. One happened recently where they followed our Twitter. This new show, it's the only reason we found out about them. I was like, that's a strange, like, you're just doing our podcast. And you specifically, like, connected with us on social media.
Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, or market research. I mean,
yeah, I mean, I'm certainly, my ego is not wounded. But I guess I won't go any further into that for professional courtesy. But it's certainly, some people are like, oh my God, they stole your idea. I'm like, well, they can.
Right. And that gets down to, in copyright, the idea-expression dichotomy, which is that any individual expression can be copyrighted, but a specific idea cannot be copyrighted, because that would so limit the field of copyright that pretty soon no one would be able to do anything.
Well, okay, so, you know, let me ask you a question then, because when you said that, it triggered this sort of semi-dormant project memory in my head. So, because you said that, I was like, yeah. So, like, how much do you have to change before the expression is legally distinct?
Right.
And I guess, I feel like it's probably, okay, for my producing partner's sake, I will keep the details somewhat vague.
Yes, all the 80 people who subscribe to this channel might steal the idea and run with it.
Well, it's not about stealing. It's about, this is something we might do, and if we do it, being able to claim innocence and like, gee, we didn't know.
Oh no, yeah, definitely.
Might end up being there's a play that was written in the mid 20th century by a French playwright, and it's fabulous. It's totally within the wheelhouse of our company's mission statements. And we started working on a production of it years ago, like in our first year. And then along the way, we got hooked up with a producer who had like a lot of resources and wanted to like take it big, right? We were going to do this weird immersive adaptation. He was like, no, let's do the play. But we all agreed that the script needed, at the very least, a new translation.
Okay.
And he had a pretty direct line to the estate of this playwright, who's, you know, deceased, and was very confident that we could get some leeway there. It didn't work out. We basically got a flat no, and it more or less killed the project, because none of us were interested in doing just a revival of the play as is.
Okay.
But like, my company had spent a good number of months devising a very cool adaptation of it. And it has always kind of been a dream of mine ever since that like when we have the time and the resources, whenever that's going to be, to just put up. This isn't the title of it, but like there's the Oresteia, the Greek play,
Right.
and there's an adaptation called An Oresteia. So I'm like, we'll just call it A blank instead of the blank.
So that gets a little bit fuzzy because there's not a hard and fast rule on what do you have to change. And I hate when that's the answer, because that's the answer so much in law.
Of course.
Generally, when you see that kind of thing, it is at the very least, all names have been changed to protect the innocent. All serial numbers have been filed off.
Right.
Like, I think you could make an argument, and I don't know, The Birdcage, which is an adaptation of La Cage aux Folles, and I apologize for my French since it's been since high school.
Sure.
But I don't know if they specifically licensed it. They probably did because Hollywood is gun shy, but you could make an argument that there is enough transformative about it that you could have done it without permission, given the setting has changed, the language has changed, a lot of the context is changed. So you're looking at that level of thing, and transformative, that phrase is really important, especially in certain circuit courts, because when we've looked at the fair use, right? Everybody puts this is fair use on their YouTube videos. And
I just rewatched Lindsay Ellis's fantastic video on fair use.
She did a very good one on that, and I hate everybody who puts their fair use on it. But fair use is a 4-factor balancing test, and one of the factors is transformation. And under the idea that if you are adding a significant enough amount of literary or artistic merit, that it should be allowed to stand, which is how we get commentaries, and the root of satire and parody is that. And Carey v. Prince is the controlling case where in some circuits they've basically said, none of the other 4 factors matter. All that matters is transformation. And if you have transformation, that's it. That's the ball game. And my brother, who is also does copyright and is my co-author on some of the stuff that we've done, goes on rants about how Carey has completely muddied the water on what is important in fair use, and we need a Supreme Court case to 100% shake it out.
Well, okay, so I guess this is a great opportunity for you to educate me.
Sure.
And maybe the viewers will learn something too. I'm sorry, I hated that as soon as I started saying it. Because this is an area in which I really do kind of hit a wall in my knowledge. So when you say, okay, so I vaguely understand the concept of circuit courts, right? Those are courts in specific states.
So a circuit, that's a district court. So when you file a federal lawsuit, which copyright is governed federally, there is a federal copyright office, and the copyright and trademark office are covered by the same office. And so anything that you do copyright is filed in federal district court, which are the courts, at least one in every state of the union.
Okay.
Some states like New York, I want to say, has 4 federal districts. Nebraska's just got 1. Iowa's got 2.
Iowa. How'd you swing that 2nd district, Iowa?
They bribed someone. So the bigger the state, the more districts you have, but every state has at least 1. A circuit court then is what's one level above that. So like the 10th Circuit, which is Colorado and a bunch of other states, the 9th Circuit, which is honestly kind of just California and Pacific Northwest. And that comes from, the term circuit court comes from the practice that existed in the 18th and 19th centuries, where judges would literally ride the circuit. They'd get on a horse and they'd go from town to town to town. And all of the attorneys would go with them. So you have great stories of Abraham Lincoln riding the circuit, staying in a bed with another attorney, and waking up and going and arguing in front of a judge who was staying at the same tavern that he was. They were all riding the circuit.
Wow. Well, where's that Showtime miniseries?
Exactly, right? That was not in the Daniel Day-Lewis Lincoln.
Shit. I got it just very quickly. I hate it. Sometimes I'll hear something like that, some like historical whatever, and I'm like, that does not fit under the mission statement of any of the 19 like producing companies I have a stake in. I want that to be made, but there's no justification for me to make that. That's really cool.
Write it as a romance novel, Love on the Circuit.
Perfect.
But so circuit courts are where you appeal up from the district court. So that's you'll hear like, oh, the Ninth Circuit overruled, like when Proposition 8 was being challenged.
So it's a federal authority, but coming from a certain region. Is that the idea?
Right. Like it's because every state has their district court or courts. Then the next level up, basically, it would be too many courts if every state also had a federal appellate court. So in order to cut down on the number of federal judges we need, because those are lifetime appointments, the circuits are composed of multiple states. And then you appeal from the federal district court to the federal circuit court, and then you appeal from the federal circuit court to the Supreme Court.
Okay, but it's federal law all the way through that.
Yeah, it is, because copyright is controlled federally, because it's
sure.
explicitly granted to Congress in the Copyright Clause of the Constitution.
So when we talk about a specific circuit court decision about copyrights, am I correct then in saying that that decision does not necessarily hamstring other circuit courts to make the same decision?
Exactly. And the number one way to get the Supreme Court to take a case, because the Supreme Court does not have to take any case. It gets to choose through a process that it calls granting certiorari, or granting cert.
Okay. Certiorari, how do you spell that?
Certiorari.
Great. Cool.
Latin. We love Latin.
It's the best.
So one of the easiest ways to get the Supreme Court to grant cert is to show a circuit split where the Ninth and the Second have decided differently. Because the theory is that we should all be living under the same interpretation of federal law.
Right.
So if two circuits are not agreeing, the Supreme Court will step in to say which circuit has decided correctly, or sometimes that none of them have decided correctly and that they need to all do better, or different at least.
Very Talmudic.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So
yeah.
Cariou was, I believe, and Andrew will yell at me if I get this wrong, but Cariou was the Second Circuit.
Okay.
And so they have currently a very different definition of what transformative means. And so that's binding in the Second Circuit, but it's only persuasive in other circuits, and some of the other circuits have specifically different definitions and rulings of how much transformation is the whole thing.
Oh God, that's so. Sorry, I'm just very. That's fascinating. I'm overwhelmed because as you were talking, I was thinking about like other sort of levels of this conversation that reminds me of, other levels of like just this idea of. Okay, I don't want to get all like stoner sophomore in college here.
We are recording this on 420, so I mean, go wherever you want. Oh my
God, you're right. Ugh, God, I'm not. I say I don't have to worry about incriminating myself because I hate smoking pot. I wish I liked it, but I don't. So 420 is always this like very sad holiday for me. That was like, yeah, like no, I just get really dizzy and anxious.
I've never tried it for any bar associations that might be watching this. But I appreciate now of all times, people just wanting to stay home and eat Doritos and chill.
Yeah. Look, my fridge is full of pizza. I'm about to spout some real, subjective reality bullshit. We can still get a little bit of our stoner in here. But like this idea that so much of our society is kind of predicated on this fantasy of clear boundaries. When in fact, like, I don't know, we just had this big argument last night on my Twitch channel about the idea of canon. And
Yes.
I am aware of the fact that I take a somewhat anarchist approach to a lot of things like this, where I'm just like, fuck it, everything's fine, everything's the same. Like, whenever there's an election, I'm like, why do we have states? States aren't real. I've told friends, like, whatever, you can have your birthday whenever you want. Birthdays are a state of mind. But like, these laws that are theoretically federal, right? They theoretically apply to the entire nation equally. But of course, for the same reason that, of course, we have states and of course we have districts, it's too large and too complex to realistically expect like a singular laser-focused authority. There has to be that kind of prismatic fracturing. And we hope and kind of try and believe that through that fracturing, that we'll have many voices saying the same thing. But of course, that'll never happen.
Right.
Which is why we have, of course, as you say, the appeal process up to the Supreme Court to try and get that, like, no, mom and dad said. But like, until that happens, and again, as you say, there are so many things in which that has not happened yet and may never happen. This may seem like a stretch, but going all the way back to people taking pictures of naked actors in the park, we have certainly taken advantage of the gray area and ambiguity in the copyright law, and also just sort of the language that we use. We don't lie to people and say, like, it's illegal for you to take pictures.
Right.
But what we will sometimes say is, please don't take pictures. This is a copyrighted work.
And that's, I mean, that's a great response from a lawyer's perspective, because that is stating the absolute truth.
Right.
Shading in a little bit, but if you had come to me asking me for something, I hope that I would have come up with something as simple as that to discourage it.
Yeah, but we've had a few years to work out the kinks.
Right.
And we can talk about this separately if we want to, but I will reinforce that it's a lot of it's perverts. We have had issues with press also disregard, like, people we've specifically had conversations with about what they can and can't photograph, and then they just sort of blow it off and then talk to me about how we're being un-American when we tell them to stop.
Which is a common problem in all areas.
Right.
Only made worse by having naked people.
Right. But again, it is that thing, like, well, you say your thing and I say my thing, and there are systems in place for us to go to a higher common authority to make a decision. But until that happens, we're all, I wasn't joking when I said Talmudic, right? We're all interpreting the law our different ways. And it rocks my entire mind.
We are all agreeing to a shared hallucination that there is consistency until there is finally consistency.
Yes.
And it's and there are things like today, a decision dropped, 6-3 from the Supreme Court, finally saying, yes, all criminal jury convictions must be unanimous.
Whoa.
Because there were Louisiana until recently, and I think it was Oregon until today, allowed for convictions in certain circumstances where there was not a unanimous jury.
Oh my God.
And the other 48 states thought that was nonsense because it's nonsense.
We put all that time into making 12 Angry Men, and this is the shit you pull?
Well, and in Louisiana, it was almost certainly rooted in racism. And
Sure.
in Oregon, who knows? It's Oregon. But yeah, and the split came down, interestingly, because Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Thomas joined with Ginsburg, Sotomayor, and Breyer, saying, yes, they have to be unanimous. Roberts, Alito, and Kagan dissented.
Hmm.
And it's one of the things.
Why do you think that was? Because I don't know much, but I know enough to know that is an abnormal split, right?
So what the general consensus is that Gorsuch is a historical guy, so he's looking like, hey, 400 years since Blackstone, we've been saying you have to have unanimous juries. Thomas, I am on record as saying that I think if you gaze too long into Thomas's jurisprudence, it gazes back. And
Sure.
It's the non-Euclidean geometry of the law, and I just don't know.
Yeah, his law book is the House of Leaves.
Exactly. Which I've never read, but I have sitting next to me right now because I plan to start.
Oh, really? Yeah. Weird. I've also never read it, and I'm on record saying I never will because my brain is already like pretty fragile.
I have a friend who is going mad reading it, and she wanted some backup, so I picked up a copy.
Oh, that's very kind of you.
Kagan was the surprise, and I think it came down to looking at the opinion for her that this does open up the idea of what about 30 or 40 previous years of trials with people still in jail claiming, well, I was 11-1 or the jury wasn't polled.
Yeah.
Do I have to have another trial? Or do I get to have another trial from their perspective? And what will that do disruptively? But it also illustrates, we think of the Supreme Court as being monolithically Democrat and Republican, and there are 4 Democrats and 5 Republicans right now. And it is on big ticket issues, and it definitely has gotten more so on big ticket issues over the last 20, 30 years. Mm-hmm. But on the things that don't end up in State of the Union speeches or political stump speeches, they get weird.
Yeah.
Like abortion, fine. Abortion is always going to go one way depending on what the justice is. But things that aren't at that level, the Supreme Court gets deeply weird sometimes.
Sure. Out of curiosity, what is although I'm guessing the answer is we don't know yet, but what is the decision on people who are still in prison due to ununanimous convictions?
The answer is going to be, it's going to be decided out by the next round of lawsuits, and it's going to come back up. The Supreme Court, as a rule, rules, there's too many uses of the word rule, as a custom, the Supreme Court only rules very narrowly, and so they are
right
never going to say, oh, and by the way, this also means X, Y, and Z for the last 30 years of convictions, we have to go back.
But I have to imagine that criminal defense lawyers are around the country are now well, I guess not around the country, but in Louisiana or Oregon are scrambling now.
Tomorrow. There are going to be appeals filed tomorrow, guaranteed.
That's wild.
That's the way it always happens when there's a big structural change from the Supreme Court, is that it immediately kicks off this ripple of follow-on lawsuits down the road. We don't talk about it, but there were 3 rounds of lawsuits called Brown v. Board of Education.
Oh, sure.
And to the point where parts of it were still being litigated into the 70s. And since I went to law school in Kansas, I had law professors that helped litigate the 3rd round of Brown v. the Board of Education.
Oh my God. That's
why the Supreme Court tries to rule so narrowly, because everything they do kicks off an avalanche.
Yeah. This country's too big, man. It's too many of us.
You can definitely tell that some of the institutions of this country were not designed with a country of this size.
Right. No, for sure.
In mind.
Well, yeah, something that I think about a lot. I read a book a couple of years ago about the history of meat in America.
Okay.
Meat production, meat consumption, marketing, from the agricultural to the economical to the cultural, everything. And the way the book begins is by talking about, looking at primary sources from the first Europeans who came here explicitly to colonize, and how they were just like, holy shit, they got so much stuff here. There's so much land. There's so much wildlife and vegetation and space. Like the abundance was so overwhelming that it like warped their brains basically and kind of drove them wild with these dreams of infinity. And it does feel like a lot of the march of American history and culture, well, I mean, manifest destiny, right? Like, let's fulfill the dream of that infinity. But like, I don't know, man. I don't think you guys really understood what that would mean.
Well, and especially for the institutions, like I'm going to get the numbers exactly wrong, but the difference between how many people a member of the House of Representatives represented for the original 13 colonies versus how much they represent on average today. Yeah. And it is orders of magnitude larger, to the point where if we were going to preserve the same scope of representation from the original Congress, we would need, like, I think the article said 1,500 or 2,000 representatives.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And the Supreme Court is also a fascinating evolution in our history because it was originally nothing. The original Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Jay, left to be an ambassador. Because it was just not important enough.
Yeah.
And it is only later, starting with Marbury versus Madison, that you begin to see, oh, okay, well, now this is a pillar of our community and of our democracy. And because it does not say explicitly in the Constitution the Supreme Court can declare a law unconstitutional. And there are people to this day that think Marbury versus Madison, which was the origin of judicial review, was wrongly decided. And argue that the Supreme Court shouldn't have that and that it is too powerful. But it has been that is such a part of how we view our democracy nowadays.
Yeah.
It's copied by younger democracies all over the world.
Yeah. Man, I don't know if it's just a month and a half in quarantine or what. No, it's not that, because I would have been depressed about this before. I think part of the reason that I'm trying to resist turning this into just like a confessional podcast, but like it's the only way I know how to approach this, really. I think part of the reason that I have a hard time really diving deep into things like learning about the law and learning about the structures of government is because it just immediately depresses me. Like, it just gets grim in my mind so quickly when I think about yeah, like what you were saying about like the number of representatives would have to be so much higher. And that makes me think like how ill represented we are now and how the country is so big. And, you know, we somehow have this illusion that, you know, we're supposed to make the same laws for, you know, people on a reservation across the country or people in a housing project in Queens or a farmer in where, like, it's just how and then to think that while we're trying to figure that out, there are also people who are arguing that a thing that happened 200 years ago that is the bedrock of our judicial system, people are like still debating whether or not that's bullshit. I'm just like, how are we ever supposed to put out a fucking fire ever?
Right. Law school can be a very depressing time, I won't lie. For a variety of reasons, from the normal grad school reasons to the crushing debt, which is also a normal grad school reason. But I've got $250,000 of school debt, so
America.
But something that my torts professor said to me on the very first day has always stuck with me for why I have any hope that I do, and that's civil law is what stopped vendettas. Civil law is what stopped blood feuds. The idea that we as a society can buy into an external source of justice for not just crimes, but for petty wrong. Petty is the wrong word, but for non-criminal wrong.
Sure.
That even though it may take a while, If you steal my land, I have a recourse. If you abduct my dog, I have a recourse.
Mm-hmm.
It is what keeps us from turning back to dueling. It is what keeps us from turning back to guerrilla warfare among Virginia hill tribes. You know, and I meant like Clampets and McCoys for tribes.
Sure.
It's what keeps us a society.
Yeah.
And there is something noble in the fact that we try, even though obviously there are so many problems with, especially criminal law and its enforcement and how it is applied radically unequally, and the access to justice and 1,000 other things.
Yeah.
That we absolutely fuck up terribly. At its heart, we are trying, and we have institutions that have delivered great justice to people who needed it and who had nowhere else to turn, like Brown and like Roe and a host of other things.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good line. Yeah, I guess ironically, the way to combat the depression of thinking too big is to think big and look at, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. Which, by the way, I found out is a quote that originates in a book from, I believe, the 1860s.
I knew it was older than that. It was not an MLK quotation. That it was older.
Yeah, the arc of the moral universe is long, but I believe it bends towards justice. I believe it was a Lutheran minister. Yeah, I don't know. I was looking that up for something recently. I don't remember why. But yeah, I think about that a lot.
Yeah, I think especially right now we have to.
Yeah.
To kind of bring it back to a more concrete grounding.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I am happy for this conversation to go wherever it goes. Are there other questions that you have, not just about, I mean, copyright law was how I pitched it, but it can be about anything. Are there things about law that you've wanted to know that you have an opportunity to throw out right now?
Well, we didn't get into the other explicitly law-related component of this Naked Shakespeare thing, which is our legal right to be naked.
Right.
Which is very specific to New York, and I don't remember, there's like a couple other places in the country that have this law, but I don't have a comprehensive knowledge of it. But in New York, there is, in the penal code, it states that anyone can be topless at any time in public, and full nudity is permitted if it is part of an artistic exhibition.
Interesting. And that is really specific state by state, because I guarantee you, like, Nebraska does not have. Colorado
I mean,
definitely allowed toplessness for women. So,
the reason I know what I do know about some other states is because, our first production got a ton of press, and so we got a number of offers from people around the country to bring our production there in one capacity or another. And so that involved looking into, like, well, can we even do that in Florida?
Yeah.
Can we do that in Philadelphia? But yeah, in New York, that's been allowed, I think, for quite some time. But the thing that is always very funny to me, and we kind of played with this a little bit in that first production, is like, okay, so I get that this law is sort of mostly meant for, like, like, you can put, whatchamacallit, like the Venus de Milo in public. You can have, like body painting day is a big thing in New York.
Okay.
But theater is interesting because, like, especially if it's outside and there's not, like, lights up, lights down, or a door you walk in or walk out. Like, all right, well, when does it start? When is it over? And the joke that I used to make to press was, you know, we're allowed to be naked as long as we're still speaking in iambic pentameter.
Okay.
But but like, I was a wisecrack. I mean, there's no like legal basis for that. And, you know, we've talked about, like, are we allowed to be naked during rehearsals?
And there is probably case law on the books in New York giving more of a definition, but generally the law does a decent job of taking into account that there are circumstances surrounding something. So I would not be surprised if there is a case law saying that you could rely on to reasonably say, yeah, it does not have to be, oh God, that was the last sentence, period. Everyone have your clothes on or the cops are going to come in.
Right.
Probably shouldn't do a meet and greet afterwards still naked.
Although the reasons for that are, the non-legal reasons take precedence for me for not to do that, yeah.
Although I could see an argument that would be part of the artistic value of the show, of comfort, making it more comfortable and normal.
I would happily argue that.
It definitely could be that that's not something that the law encompassed, and that they just didn't want anybody running around, you know, chiseling the dicks off of statues like the Pope did.
Oh my God.
But that now, yeah, you are pushing that. And there's, for a country that has been around as long as ours has, and a judiciary that's been around since the Constitution, since 1789, we have a surprising number of areas that come up every year, not just in new technology, but that are just, we've never had to think about it before now, so now we are.
Yeah.
My favorite one that I bring up to people is, who owns the copyright of your tattoo?
Well, mine are very specifically copyrighted by DC Comics.
Right. But it's on your body. So if you lifted up your sleeves, should we get a copyright strike? Could we get a copyright strike?
Yeah, jeez.
And there's no Supreme Court case on that. I wrote an article about it because every case that's come up before the courts arguing over the copyright of tattoos has been only at the circuit level or has been settled out of court. And it's things like an NBA player who has a tattoo and then is made into a video game.
Right.
Or the tattoo artist who did Mike Tyson's big face tattoo.
Yeah.
Sued The Hangover 2.
That's right. I heard about that. Yeah. Oh my God, I forgot about that.
I wrote a whole article arguing that we should treat, for the purposes of copyright, people like buildings.
Okay. What does that mean in this context? I don't know anything about buildings.
There's a law called the Architectural Works Copyright Protection Act that was passed in 1990.
Catchy.
Yeah, I know, right? And it says that in architecture, kind of alone of all of the other creative arts, there are bifurcated rights. You have the rights owned by the architect in the design, and you have the rights owned by the building owner in the building.
Oh. Okay.
So I can modify or change or destroy a building I own, even though it is a piece of art that was created by the plans of an architect.
Interesting.
But I can't make another building on the same design without using or paying or licensing the design from that architect.
Okay. I feel like I'm grasping like 20% of it. Walk me through the rest of this analogy.
Okay. So the analogy would be that whoever designs your tattoo owns that design, and you can't merchandise it. You can't sell shirts with it or
oh, I see.
Put it on a backpack, but you can be in any form of a depiction of your body. Like when you do a flyover of New York, you don't need permission of the owners of any of those buildings to do crowd shots. Or a specific person that wants to publicize their building doesn't need the permission of the architect. So you could be in a video game, dunking basketballs with your tattoo on your arm,
Hmm.
because that's your body. But you could not then sell a t-shirt with the tattoo design on it because that's their design.
But could you sell a t-shirt with a picture of you with a picture of your tattoo on it?
And I would say yes, because it's a depiction of your body.
Oh, okay. But like, then, okay, let's say I've got a tattoo on my back,
Right.
right? What happens if we're zooming in close enough that it's the tattoo on my skin tone?
Right.
And you put that on a t-shirt.
And that's, I don't know. It's, I would say there has to be, for this standard, I completely made up, right? This is just
I love it.
But I would say there has to be enough representation of you that we understand it's your body. You can't just have like 2 pixels of Pantone Pitr Strait skin tone around the design.
Let's get that going.
Yeah. We have to be able to see, okay, that is the back of someone's back, even if I don't recognize whose back it is.
Yeah, interesting. And I obviously, as I imagine, this totally changes if, like mine are, the tattoo design is already copyrighted by someone else, by a third party.
And that's a really interesting, completely unsettled area of law. Like, could DC tell you you can't have those tattoos?
Yeah.
You bought them in a commercial transaction. You paid someone for those designs to be put on your body.
Yeah.
Have you committed copyright infringement? Has the artist committed copyright infringement? What are the remedies available for that copyright infringement? Could a court order you to have those tattoos removed?
I would simply have to riot. I would have to,
right.
You know.
And that's because a court can say, it can order infringement or counterfeits destroyed. Like if you're making Louis Vuitton bags in your bedroom, those can be destroyed as a part of the law.
Yeah. This is where I always find such contradiction in myself, in that, like, I am always somewhat shocked to hear myself even think certain, like, I am a person who creates artistic works, and I have a desire to have them protected, and I have a desire to be fairly compensated for them.
Right.
I know and associate with countless people whose lives depend on their ability to control the financial and cultural distribution of their artistic work. At the same time, I hear myself thinking things about, like, yeah, but man, ideas want to be free, dude.
And I think that's the fundamental tension of copyright, because for a long time, copyright didn't exist.
Right.
And it was only in the 1700s with the Statute of Anne that we moved away from the idea of the publisher of a book owns the copyright to the artist owns the copyright. And it's been a long development of, like, the original copyright term was a term of 14 years, renewable for another term of 14 years. And it has now gone to the point where it is life of the author plus 70 years. And how much, if you build a house, you own that house until you die, and then whoever you give it to owns it until the end of time. How much should we let ideas and their expressions be controlled?
Yeah.
Versus how much should we, when should we force them to be part of the cultural, the Jungian unconscious? And it's
clearly, the answer is, as soon as we establish universal basic income and redistribute wealth and annihilate the economy as we know it.
And I was just past a follow-up question for the tattoos. What about the circumstance where you draw a tattoo that an artist puts on you? And that's,
well, in that case, wouldn't the tattooist be more of an artisan than an artist?
And that's, I think it would come down to work for hire.
Yeah.
which is what that is when you are expressing something for another person who holds the copyright.
Boy, damn it. I'm trying to remember what paperwork I signed when I got my tattoo. I don't remember if there was anything that explicitly stated what because I did the thing. I'm sure it'll be fine, but I did the thing that I really, especially after grad school, I kind of swore I wouldn't do, which is I didn't think about the legal ramifications because I'm just this guy and it's never going to get to that level.
Yes.
Because there are so many, you don't need me to tell you anyone about this, but there are these, huge cases of theatrical productions that blow up and have to deal with these massive legal battles that could have been solved if someone had written a contract when they were a couple of schmucks developing a thing in their loft apartment in Brooklyn. But because they're like, we're just some schmucks in a loft in Brooklyn. We don't need to write a contract. We're never going to make it big. And then by the time they did, it was too late.
Right.
I kind of sort of like, look, just fucking read the thing. Don't sign it if you don't like it. And if there's no thing to read, write the thing and then read it.
That's
because you never know.
What I tell people a lot is, yes, write everything down, and it doesn't have to be in legalese. It does not have to be
right.
You don't have to throw a lot of warranties and disclaimers in there. Just write down who owns what, in what percentage, and sign it in front of witnesses, or even better, a notary. And
yeah,
part of it is like this tattoo stuff is fundamentally no one is thinking about this until it comes up in random lawsuits. But as we start to see more body modification become available, it is something that is going to come up more. Tattoos have become much more common and accepted over the last 30 years. And we've developed new ways of doing things that, like someday we're going to put holograms under our skin and it's going to be wild.
Yeah.
And but yeah.
Well, at the same time at the same time as the trend of tattoos and body mods is increasing, so too is the ways in which our images are capped and broadcast, both with and without our permission. The fact that we're doing this podcast right now, the fact that I have a Twitch channel, that people, there's Instagram, even going back like reality television, the odds that the image of someone who isn't Cary Grant or Katharine Hepburn being shown to massive numbers of people for financial gain is so much higher now.
Yeah.
Well, so things like image rights become so much more entangled with common day life.
The one that I really want to write an article about is memes. Like you've got Success Kid, or you've got the Goosebumps girl.
Yeah.
Their image is their face is being used for, like, Success Kid is like 13 now.
At least, I think.
And where does that fall? And is putting, if I took a screen cap right now and I put some white text on it, is that sufficiently artistic? Is that sufficiently
transformative
to grant me the use of your face and to grant the internet for the next however long until it gets bored the use of your face? Or things like the confused Fry meme, where Fry is 100% copyrighted, trademarked, owned wholesale by Fox. But is it fair use to slap some text on there and make people chuckle?
Well, the very idea of what a meme is, right? A memetic idea, a viral idea, is linked back to this, dumb stoner anarchistic idea in my mind of like, well, the whole point of ideas is to propagate and multiply and divide and diversify like that. I mean, like I have the Superman tattoos I have are two like diametrically prismatically split of the same idea, and they're both beautiful and they both exist because the idea was allowed to propagate.
Yeah. And that's what the public domain is supposed to do, and why for so long we treated intellectual property as being destined to go back to the public domain, that you can own an idea for a time, you can own an expression of an idea for a while, but you know, if you love it, let it go, and the next person can. And it is only one of the podcasts, other podcasts besides the Reroll that I listen to is You're Wrong About, and they have a recurring comment that there's our old villain capitalism again, the root of everything. It is only once we start having these intense properties in the film sense that we end up, or the literary sense originally, but when it becomes its own full industry of like, oh, Sherlock Holmes is going to be 30 stories and movies and silent movies, that we start going more and more time on top of that.
Yeah.
Which leads to weird things like half of Sherlock Holmes is currently in the public domain and half is not.
Jeez.
I think it's like, Watson's first wife is in the public domain. Watson's second wife is not.
But that's really funny. Yeah, look, let us not, just back to the Superman tattoos, let us not overlook the fact that DC Comics, well, they weren't DC then, but like totally screwed Siegel and Schuster over for a very long time. And, you know, Bill Finger still is lucky if his name gets slapped on any Batman product, despite being unambiguously the actual creator of Batman. You know, the capitalist machine is kind of, as much as they are fiercely protective of their intellectual property, so much of the history of that is built on seizing intellectual property from creators.
Well, and it's interesting because what extended copyright the last time was the Copyright Term Extension Act, aka the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act, which is also colloquially referred to as the Mickey Mouse Protection Act. Because in the 70s, back during that crazy time when we elected Sonny of Sonny and Cher as a United States Senator.
Oh, yeah.
Mickey Mouse, Steamboat Willie was going to enter the public domain.
Right.
And they granted a huge extension to things that were made before that met certain criteria that just also happened to include Mickey Mouse. And it got extended. And that was actually was the last year of that extension. So for the first time in like 40 years, things are now entering the public domain again. And
I have a collaborator who does a lot of work with public domain things, specifically like taking text from public domain films and repurposing them into either scripts or just, you know, rehearsal text. And yeah, she shared this list of like, hey, there's a bunch more stuff we can play with now.
And just the cultural difference between in the 1970s when this passed completely uncontroversially, and now where if they'd tried to extend it again, I think there would have been a huge pushback. And they didn't try. Like, Disney did not come out trying to save Steamboat Willie. And I believe, nobody who's watching this start posting Steamboat Willie on YouTube without checking with someone. But I believe like the earliest Mickey Mouse stuff has now entered, at least one of them, the public domain.
And so what exactly would you say is the reason that they didn't try and wouldn't have been successful if they did?
I think because there has been a huge pushback for against what someone working in the field named Harold Feld calls copyright maximalism. this idea that copyright should be super ironclad, very few limitations, as long as possible. There has been a pushback against that, kind of culturally, and a push towards more ideas should be free, and memes as the unit of expression of idea and information are multiplying at a pace on the internet where you cannot be maximalist. And I think also we all lived through, well, not everyone on YouTube, but you and I both lived through the Napster days and the raids on people's houses for having pirated MP3. And we're seeing that interesting thing kind of play out now with, there are companies that will buy up TikTok videos of small TikTokers and then market them and go after anyone who uses them or references them, and so we are still seeing that kind of maximalism and abuse, frankly, but we have changed so much as a culture that Disney did not, unless it was very behind the scenes, did not try to put up that fight.
So if I'm correctly interpreting what you're saying, would you say that the masses have begun to seize the means of production?
The means of production.
Damn it.
Don't feel bad, because this is another thing I want to write an article about, and it is literally seizing the means of production is the title that I've
wow, we should have rehearsed this ahead of time. I could have set it up so much better.
That's the premise of the channel, is I don't rehearse.
I know. No, yeah. That makes sense.
We are in a very different place, and I think it'll be fascinating to see where it goes in the rest of the world.
Oh, let's just hope we stick around long enough to see how it turns out.
Yeah, I mean, that is assuming that we have a world.
Yeah. All right, no. I can't go back into that. I did my one depression dip.
On the depressing note.
I did the depression dip for the interview, and that was enough.
So we've been going for a little over an hour now.
Oh, wow.
Is there more that you want to? Anything else? Any other questions you have? I don't mind just gabbing and publishing it, but I don't want to take your time necessarily.
I'm trying to think. I was the other day. I was sort of mining my brain for what areas of law I have like a meaningful connection to. Talked about the podcast, talked about the perverts, talked about the press.
Has anyone ever tried to threaten the film re-roll or offered that you guys might be in danger for?
No, in terms of like the copyright holders of the film. Right.
Or someone thinking that they know. Do you get bad legal emails to the film re-roll?
Emails, I don't believe so. I don't read the Reddit anymore because I decided that I like my mental health. I'm trying to remember if like in the early days, I don't know. I feel like, so there's this band Starbomb, which does like video game parody music. And they had 3 albums, and all of them start with a kind of tongue-in-cheek, but not that tongue-in-cheek, disclaimer about how like we don't own the copyrights to any of these characters, so Nintendo, please don't sue us. And I just always, and maybe it's just because I do have something of a background in this kind of stuff, that I would listen to them like, guys, Nintendo's not gonna fucking sue you. Like, you made a song about like gangbanging Kirby. Like I think that again, I am not a lawyer, but I feel like the parody aspect of this is pretty well established.
You'd think.
Yeah. I mean, they're obviously on a bigger stage than the reroll is. So, I mean, that's always the thing, right? The bigger you are, the more you have to reasonably expect trouble on that front. Right. And so I certainly don't blame them. I'm not like these schmucks over here worrying about, litigious companies, because that's a very good thing to worry about.
Yeah.
But yeah, the reroll, I think, is just pretty. To me, it's so clearly a work of satire, and it's by definition transformative.
I mean, yes, I would agree. I was just curious if you guys.
You're asking, yeah. I don't think so. You know.
A couple of years ago, I did a podcast with a group called the Webcomics Alliance that are all webcomics.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And they do because a friend of mine was part of that, and so they all go to conventions and they do like artist alleys and stuff. And a lot of the questions, they heard a lot of like myths from artists' alleys, like, oh well, if you're only selling it for under $10, they can't sue, or if you don't make more than $100 from a character, they can't sue.
I love stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's it's not a pet peeve. Like the YouTube disclaimer thing is a pet peeve because it's meaningless. But those are just
right.
baffling to me because they come from like all urban legends. They come from nowhere and they mean nothing. And
yeah, are
there like theater myths about copyright that get shared around, or do you guys have it kind of pretty sorted out?
I'm trying to think. This is something that my producing partner who recently got a degree in this from Columbia, like she would definitely know. It's honestly, the truth is, well, I say the truth, as far as my experience has been first and second hand, the truth is that even at sort of the crazy high levels, theater continues to be like significantly more loosey-goosey with a lot of this stuff, often to its detriments. I think that because it is, by definition, local, I mean, even a nationally touring production, the production you are seeing at any given moment is happening in that one place.
Right.
My feeling has always been that has somewhat disingenuously preserved this feeling of like, oh, we're just a bunch of scrappy kids putting on a show. Whereas like no one in Hollywood or in the television industry has any illusions about the fact that it's a machine. It's a corporate machine. This is a business. We write things down.
They've all seen how the sausage is made a lot more, and they don't have any illusions.
Right. I mean, when you look at these hype, I mean, like Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, the most expensive Broadway production ever. I'm sure it'll be surpassed eventually, but like it was more expensive than the previous title holder by literally an order of magnitude.
Wow.
I believe Shrek was something like, I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but it was something like Shrek was about 1.7 mil and Spider-Man was 17 mil.
Wow.
I mean, it was insane. And like Julie Taymor, fucking Spider-Man, U2. I mean, these massive established corporate entities and personalities, and they still fucked it up. They fucked it up so bad. This is another project that, like, because it doesn't fit in the wheelhouse of anything that I'm actually getting paid to do, I'll probably never get it done. But I've always, ever since it happened, I really want to adapt the legal briefs for the Spider-Man lawsuits into a staged reading.
Okay.
Anyone who's watching or listening to this, and you as well, if you haven't, you can find them online. The filings from the two sets of lawyers, it really is like a play. They like snipe at each other. There's passive aggressive shit. It's so good.
There is this perception that the law is so boring, and don't get me wrong, a lot of it is so boring. But there are moments of such amazing, hysterically funny or brutally vicious. One of my favorite opinions of all time came from a judge in Texas, and it's in a case called Unity Marine. And in the opinion, he accuses the two lawyers of having entered into a conspiracy complete with hats and secret handshakes to draft amateurish pleadings in crayon on the back of gravy-stained paper placemats.
Whoa.
I will send you a link to this opinion.
Whoa.
He goes off on them. And things like, somehow the attorney threw a dart at his bookshelf and hit a non-existent copy of the Federal Reporter to cite to. It's like, oh, this judge is real mad.
Oh, sassy judges.
Hilarious.
My ex-wife and I used to be very big fans of the show The Good Wife.
Yeah.
And, which is tons and tons of, courtroom scenes and lots of very, character judges. And we used to just say, our catchphrase watching the show is just like, man, judges be tripping. And then that's got to read it to JBT, and then for all the rest of our lives, lawyers be tripping, LBT, SBT, whatever. But yeah, judges be tripping.
It is amazing what a lifetime appointment to a federal judiciary will free up in terms of your writing. Scalia was funny, but also mean as hell. At one point, Kagan wrote in a case, Yates v. U.S., I think, about, she cited to one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish.
Oh, I think I've heard of that, yeah.
And it's like, wow, when you don't have to be anywhere else with your career, you have fun.
That's why I think it's so interesting when lawyers do it, when lawyers and clients do it, because they do not have that protection. When, again, these Spider-Man filings are just are you sure you want to put that in there? Because then sure enough, the report, the counter filing is oh, is that what they said? Would you like to see the rest of the email? And it really is like a live journal gossip fight, but for millions of dollars.
There was a case out of Texas with a pro se defendant, where pro se means you're representing yourself.
Right.
And the title of the filing was "A Motion for this court to go fuck itself and everything it stands for." And in it, the woman had claimed to learn the law by reading it for 30 days, and now she knew it better than the lawyers, and everyone was racist. And I was like, wow, okay.
Well, everybody is racist. I agree with her on that one.
No, yeah, 100%. But
sure.
And my favorite, and this is first week law school. The two cases get brought up. There is a case where one, as a matter of law, a court had to declare a house haunted.
Oh, I think I've heard of that one too.
Because the seller had claimed it was a haunted house and was not allowed to then claim it was not haunted when he was sued for selling them a haunted house. And there was another.
I wonder what the ghosts thought of that.
They should have been deposed, man. That is and then there's another one called Mayo v. XREL Mayo v. Satan and His Minions, where a guy tried to sue Lucifer for being for ruining his life, and the court had to dismiss for lack of standing because Satan, as a foreign monarch, as a sovereign, had sovereign immunity. And while they were pretty sure they could get a U.S. Marshal down there for service, they were not sure.
Oh my God, that's ridiculous. Oh, there's the one that I love is the I believe in Indiana. I could be getting that wrong. The people who tried to legally make pi equal 3.
Yep.
I love that. I love telling mathematicians and teachers about that, because if they didn't know about it before, you can just see their brains kind of crunch in on themselves.
There is a very well-known Scalia opinion, I think a majority opinion, and I don't remember the case site, but he starts off with, the Supreme Court has seen some of the most hallowed cases in American history and has made decisions that impact the lives of thousands of Americans. And now, before these hallowed halls, we must answer yet another very important question. What is golf?
What is golf, man? Good question.
It's like the law is so much more human and weird and trying its best and also deeply broken than you can even imagine.
Well, I mean, it's interesting to think about the law as an entity, sort of like a person, right? Like they don't know anything until they know it,
Yeah.
right? Like if you're training an AI or any kind of machine learning, like might seem obvious, but if you don't put it in there, it doesn't fucking know it. Like I remember doing geometry proofs in high school, which I don't know, I swear to God, I don't know why anyone ever makes that a required thing to do. It makes no sense to me, but I guess I'm quoting it now in a
This is
podcast.
why you're using it.
I guess I'm using it. But this idea of like, okay, prove that all four sides of this square are the same length. And you'd be like, well, they fucking are, because it's a square. Like, that's not the same as proving it. You have, like, prove that this triangle adds up to 180 degrees. Well, God damn it, it does. Well, you have to, it doesn't until you prove it.
Right.
So, like, what is golf? Oh, we all know what golf is. The law doesn't until we say it.
The law is the longest running and simultaneously best and worst functioning machine learning program that we've ever devised.
Oh, God.
And that's why occasionally it outputs complete garbage.
Yeah. Well, garbage in, garbage out.
I'm trying to remember, there's a saying that's basically like, bad cases make bad law.
Oh, yeah.
And it's we adapted it in law school to basically mean bad cases make good whiskey.
Sure, yeah.
And just anytime that it came up, like I wrote an amicus brief for the Supreme Court with my brother and a friend over cheerleading uniforms. Because the Supreme Court needed to decide, could cheerleading uniforms be copyrighted?
Sure.
And
what'd
then
you say?
We said no, because useful articles can't be copyrighted. The other side said yes, because the underlying design drawings can be copyrighted.
Interesting.
And then the Supreme Court scheduled oral arguments for Halloween.
Amazing.
And so the most surreal moment of my life is I'm at 4:30 in the morning. It is October 31st, freezing my ass off in Washington, D.C., lined up outside the building to wait to see if we get in to see this argument, because we were just what's called an amicus brief. We weren't a party.
Sure.
And we're there talking to a law school professor who's really excited because he's there for the first case, which is about educational, individual education plans, specifically around Wonder the Golden Doodle and whether a school had to let someone's emotional support dog in.
Ah, okay. I was like, is that a cartoon I should have heard of?
Nope, it was someone's dog.
Yeah.
It's like and it's Halloween, and we have a case about cheerleading uniforms and support dogs. And
Amazing.
This is a normal day at the Supreme Court.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about this what is golf thing. Well, so, I mean, kind of going back to like the Talmudic interpretation conversation. So I was very lucky to go to a really good high school. It was a public school, but it was huge, and a relevant fraction of the area it served was super rich. So we had a lot of property taxes going to the school. So we had things like a criminal and civil law class that we could take.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I did not have that in.
Yeah, I was very, very fortunate. I mean, when I tell people about my school, and then I tell them it was a public school, they're shocked. But I went on an exchange program, and one of the chaperones was the crim civ teacher, who I loved. And we would, on buses driving around England, we would talk about law. And one of the things he shared with me from his first year in law school, I think first week, one of his professors told the class, okay, define salad.
Okay.
And we argued about that for pretty much the whole 2-week trip. And I still bring it up sometimes. And another good one is define litter.
Yeah.
Define littering. What is the relevant difference between littering and a piece of litter? When does something become a piece of litter?
So the golf thing, because that's what I was looking up when I was looking down and being very rude.
I assumed that there was some very important research happening.
It was PGA Tour v. Martin, and it was someone who was injured and wanted an accommodation under the ADA to be able to ride in a golf cart during matches.
Hmm.
And
a spectator, a player?
No, a player.
Okay.
And the ADA requires reasonable accommodations unless such modifications would, quote, fundamentally alter the nature of such, that the public accommodations have to make reasonable modifications unless such modifications would fundamentally alter the nature of the public accommodation.
Okay.
And so the question of what is golf is, does allowing a pro golfer to ride in the cart rather than walk from hole to hole to hole fundamentally alter the nature of golf?
I didn't realize they had to walk.
So I think at that level they did. Like,
I don't know anything about golf.
I think if you or I went, we could do whatever the hell we want as long as we're not getting thrown.
I would certainly hope so.
At that level, I think that they had to walk, and the argument was that allowing him to walk, allowing a disabled contestant to not walk, rather, would fundamentally alter that.
Because it's letting him, like, conserve his energy. And
right.
Because you need all those calories. I mean, look, I don't mean to disparage golf, but, like...
Golf takes.
I'm pretty sure that...
But the exhaustion of walking from hole to hole could affect your performance.
Sure. That's dumb. Just give them all golf carts. Give them all golf carts.
But yeah, so
I'm a Supreme Court justice. Give them all golf carts.
I'll support it.
What the fuck?
So
go home, PGA Tour.
I think my roommates are looking at me for questions of food. And
okay, those are very important questions.
So if you're comfortable, we'll wrap it up there.
Yeah, this has been great.
Do you want to plug everything before we go?
Oh, sure. Didn't prepare that. Should have. The Film Reroll, the podcast in which me and a bunch of other idiots ruin movies, is at thefilmreroll.com and on all of your friendly podcast apps. I stream on Twitch at twitch.tv/Here's Peter, HERESPITR, Tuesday through Friday and Sundays at 8. I play a bunch of games that I'm not very good at and yell a lot, and sometimes get yelled at in return. Torn Out Theater, you can find our stuff at tornouttheater.org. God willing, we've got a production coming up in New York this August. Pitter Patter on Twitter, PITR. I got too many different things to plug now.
Hit up the Patreon, PITREON.com. It'll take you to his Patreon.
That's right. Hey, man, for $2 a month, you can fund an internet dum-dum. I got actually, one of my other things for today is I have to post my first official piece from the Peter archives. There's a certain tier where you get access to like weird old creative shit I did 10 years ago. And I'm going to post an exhaustive review and analysis and at some point somewhat schizophrenic ramblings of the movie 13 Going on 30 starring Jennifer Garner and Mark Ruffalo.
I am subscribed to that tier, so I will look forward to that.
I hope you love it. I'm very proud of this piece of writing, actually. I did it before I had any kind of internet notoriety, and I was like, no one's ever going to appreciate this. Well, they're going to have to now.
All right, so patreon.com, you can find him there. This has been Ad Hoc. Thank you all for watching, and remember, wash your goddamn hands.
That's right.